Welcome to Flyover Frequencies, where Midwest skies meet the people who keep aviation moving. From hangars to flight decks, classrooms to control towers, and amateurs to pros, we share stories, experiences, and practical insights from the heart of Midwest aviation.
Welcome back to Flyover Frequencies. I'm Ehren, and Andrew's here with me today. And our guest is a pilot's pilot, Russ Bird. You know, aviation's all about connections, and every so often you meet somebody who just carries themselves with a quiet confidence, and you respect it right away. That's Russ. Now, Andrew, Jonathan, and myself, we have some experience, but when you sit down with Russ, you realize he's the kind of guy that you can still learn a lot from. Russ is a retired American Airlines captain with more than 50 years of aviation experience and over 26,000 flight hours. Russ has flown around the world in everything from a Boeing 707 to a 777 and is now one of the leading experts on Embraer aircraft. He is the president of Global Aircraft Consulting, and he's guided owners through dozens of aircraft deliveries. He has built a reputation for honesty, integrity, and service that lasts well beyond the cockpit. What really sets Russ apart is the way he connects with people. Flying has given him lifelong friendships from colleagues he's flown with for decades to new pilots he's mentoring today. And at the core of it all, Kimberly, his wife of 43 years, their kids, and a bunch of grandkids who make sure he stays busy. Russ Bird isn't just about flying airplanes. He's about building lasting relationships. Russ, thanks for coming on Flyover Frequencies.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm honored to be here. You guys are great.
Good to have you.
Yeah. Well, let's jump into it. Tell us about what got you excited about aviation. Did you know that you always wanted to be a pilot, or is that something you always wanted to do?
Well, we lived in East Texas and we were on a dairy farm kind of thing. And my dad was actually Army Air Corps back before the Army and Air Force separated. And he was a crewmaster on a DC-3. I mean, he was like the guy that took care of everything from loading to maintenance. But he also was in a flying school that was associated there with all these, you know, J3 Cubs and Champs and things like that. You know, he had a logbook, he had a plotter, and he had a E6B computer. And I just thought those were like, something from outer space or something. I had no idea what that was about. But he actually had an Army Air Force jacket also, the kind of a leather jacket now. And I thought that was really cool. But he never did actually get his license or anything. But he did have these things. So he took me to an air show. It was in we were out in Nacogdoches, Texas, actually. Mr. Crawford was the manager of the airport. This was in actually 1963. I had the air show going on. I was able to get in the first airplane, but I didn't get to fly. But I just kind of fell in love with it at that point, with all the airplanes flying around and doing all their stuff. Back in those days, Houston Chronicle was a paper that was delivered to the Nacogdoches area. And they had airplanes for sale in this one part of the classified. And I was looking at that daily, just saying, what are these airplanes? Yeah, dreaming about it is just visualizing what I would do with an airplane if I had it and so yeah, it was an initial love, but, 13, 14 years old. And, so it grew into actually this year is actually 60 years of, flying, doing it all. And, I started when I was 15. So it was a long time. It's been a long time and it's been gratifying ever since.
Good for you.
Yeah, that's great. So when you did start flight training, how did you go about doing that?
My mother went to college and she had a teaching degree. And so she was invited down to Alvin, Texas, to a school to teach down there, and I went with her. And on the way there on the side of this hangar, it said "Help Wanted." I asked if I could call them up, and so we actually called them up, and I ended up stopping by there and talking to them. And it was Lori's flying school, and she had Cessnas, she had Champs, J3 Cubs. And what they needed was someone to wash the airplanes and fuel them and sweep the hangars and empty the trash and all of that. But I was 15 years old, and so I would go there on weekends and after school and just hang around airplanes. And she paid me 2 hours of flying time a week and $15 for the week. And I thought I was like rolling in money, and then you fly, 2 hours a week. I mean, that's a big deal. So, and we were flying in J3 Cubs and Champs, and that's with an instructor. I mean, the airplane itself was, I don't know, at that time was like $8 an hour, and the instructor was $2 or $3 an hour. So, I mean, it was just like so cheap, but I thought it was really expensive at that time. And now you can't get it, but stuff on 172 for like $250 an hour. It's crazy. So yeah, that started there. Soloed. Well, as long as the FAA is not listening to this, I mean, I soloed before I was 16, but I plead the Fifth Amendment on that one. But,
statute of limitations is probably run out on that by now, right?
all right, probably so. But I had this really ornery instructor that his name was Joe Hathaway, and I was so scared of him. He was just like, I wasn't doing the rudders the way I was supposed to. I wasn't doing everything else the way I was supposed to. We were operating out Airland Airport. It had a building on one end and high wires on the other, and it's a 2,700-foot runway. So he lands and he says, "I'm getting out." So I want you to turn around and take off. And I said, "You're getting out. You're soloing me?" And he said, "Yeah, just a few more 4-letter words, And he said, "I want you to turn around and take off." So I turned around and took off downwind toward the building, and I was about 3/4 of the way down the runway. And I made 3 downwind landings at this airport over the high wires downwind, and I stopped, and it was like, just shaking his head. He says, I don't know if you're ever going to live through this aviation thing, more 4-letter words, and I said, "Well, what did I do wrong?" He said, "Well, you took off downwind, you landed 3 times downwind." And I said, "Oh, well, I'm sorry," and I was like almost ready to cry. I didn't know what to do, but I was 15, and
Look at you now, though. You made it.
yeah, I survived that. Told Lori, Lori Adams, about it, and she got really mad, fired him. She soloed me again. So that was kind of the start of it all, and I just kept on working for her for quite a long time. So there's some more interesting stories with her, but we probably shouldn't get into that. She ended up spending a little bit of time incarcerated, but that's another story. She gave me a break. I was very thankful, and I kept working for her, and got out of high school at the end of 17, and went to college and kept working there as got on my flight instructor's rating by the time I was 18, and started teaching flying, working my way through college.
What year was that? Did you got your private license?
Soloed when I was 16, so that was 1966, 67, private license. Commercial was 68, flight instructors 68, so I was 18. I was getting a lot of flying in because everybody there was giving me rides in airplanes. I mean, I just hang out there all the time. We'd always be going up flying, and I would get instruction from other guys and do other stuff. But it took me about 3 years to get enough flying for the commercial.
So you made it to American Airlines eventually, but after your flight instruction time and your time with Lori, did you have any jobs in between there, or did you go to American right away?
Yeah, we went from Lori. Went over to Glenn's flying service. He was a Beechcraft dealer, and it was on the same airport. So he had all these Bonanzas, which were really cool, and he also had a flying school, and he had a VA contract where he would do air ambulance kind of stuff, So he would go to the VA hospitals. I would go along as an attendant, and we'd fly the patient wherever they were going to go, and then I'd get to fly the airplane on the way back, which was a lot of fun. But they were doing everything from hauling corpses, sick people, doing whatever they had. They did a lot, and then they had a lot of freight. But they had 4 or 5 Bonanzas. They had some Barons and a D-18 twin, a conventional gear D-18 Twin Beach, and I got to fly around in that. I never did pilot it, but I was co-pilot and hey boy on that one. So I did a lot of that. Then I went to Woody Lesker's aircraft sales and did more flight instructing. Back in those days, it's kind of who you knew and your reputation. There was a lot of people that I met all the way through these 3 or 4 years of working as a line boy and doing this other stuff. And so I think a lot of people knew me. And which at a later time after this Woody Lesker aircraft sales thing, one of the guys broke off and he ended up getting a job flying a Learjet. It was for Thunderbird Airways. It was Gordon Cooper, the astronaut, had bought this airplane, a Lear 24. Trudy Cooper was his wife. She started running this air charter thing. So she had the Lear 24 and she had a 25 and they got another 25. And then they got an Air Force contract and they bought a Lear 36 and they needed somebody to go on the 36 and we were going out to Kwajalein Islands out in the South Pacific. So I was a co-pilot on that. They said if I went to ground school that I could get a job there, and I had no idea how to, what I was doing, but I just sit in the right seat and whatever the captain said to do, that's what I did. But that's the way you did it back in those days, You don't. Nowadays, you got to go to simulators, get a SIC rating. You got to have all this stuff going on for you. And it just makes it so difficult, but in those days, it's who you knew and what you were willing to do. So this was a great experience because it ended up breaking me into jets. We were based out of Burbank, California, and we go up to Anchorage, Alaska, and then down to across the Aleutian chain and Midway Islands, and then to Kwajalein Islands, which was a military base. They would shoot missiles from Vandenberg, California, out to Kwajalein Islands. It would take a couple hours to get out there. And what we did, we were doing flying this Learjet. It had laser beam probes on the nose and in the right wing. And we had two people in the back that were meteorologist people. And then it would, with the laser beam probes, it would take the amount of water molecules per cubic centimeter of air. And we would transmit all that back to Vandenberg. And then if it was dry enough, they would shoot a missile out there. And so they're testing the accuracy of this missile. And we would go up in a high altitude holding pattern, waiting for it to enter. And it would always be at nighttime. So you see this big glaring glow of light coming down out of the sky. And it was just like a missile coming down, So then we would go, it'd almost be like an emergency descent as the missile's going straight down. And that's what you had to replicate.
Wow.
The thing about it was you couldn't go at a high speed. You had to go just about right at stall speed. So you'd have your flaps out. You'd be at the minimum, right at shaker speed as you're going down this corridor because of all the instrumentation. Couldn't go at a fast speed.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was an interesting thing. We were just hoping that there was, nothing that broke off on the en route and would hit us in the tail as we were going down there,
I had to look up Kwajalein Islands. I've never heard of that. So yeah, out by the Marshall Islands, right? Is that what you're talking about?
Halfway in Hawaii and Australia, out in the middle. It was a big World War II place, actually. Japanese were all over the place there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing. And how fascinating, and cool to be part of that testing platform. That's really cool.
Back in those days, it seemed like a lot of the general aviation guys were anti-military, and including me to a certain extent. But it was working with a lot of them, had gained a lot of respect and for what these guys did. But we did all kinds of things. We were there. We would do all these missions and do all these things. We were a civil use airplane, so we could go 300 knots, 100 feet off the ground in the water, playing like we were fighter pilots and with this Lear 36.
Nice.
That's pretty cool.
That's fun.
Was that around the 80s then that you were doing that, or was that still in the 70s?
I was 22, 23 years old. And we were actually got to fly in cutoffs and flip-flops.
Nice.
Yeah. No epaulets, huh? Hawaiian shirts and nice.
So from that, then you went to American after that?
Went back to Houston and was flying the Lears. Got my ATP rating at 23, and flying charter in those Lears, and back and forth to Kwajalein, back and forth. Try to check me out as captain because I was the only one that really knew anything. The other guy left, and so I was flying that Lear out there quite often. Gained a ton of hours doing that. Yeah, and then left there. Actually, the place closed down because the gentleman was a tax evader, and they locked the doors on him. So I went to do a bit back on the gas and was flying a Falcon 10 there, and then there was a lot of shenanigans going on by the chief pilot there, and I said, the general aviation world is just like, it's killing me. I mean, these guys are doing things that may very well kill me. And I started, saying, I think I'll try to go to the airlines, and that was really my whole goal all the way to college, through college anyway. Went to University of Houston, and back in those days, there was Pan Am, airlines that went all over the world. I just thought it was so cool. And that's the seed that had been planted in the beginning of college and what I wanted to do. And so that, all these stepping stones that I went through was invaluable. I mean, it was something that just about everyone has to do. Either are you going through the military realm of the things, or are you going to go through corporate, general aviation? So I left there after it was kind of disillusioned with the safety features of the Falcon 10 captain that I was flying with. And he was a chief pilot guy, and just one too many of watch this stuff, that he did.
Yeah.
So I started flying the airlines. I was in Houston. I wanted to stay in Houston. So if I wanted to stay in Houston, it was Continental Airlines and it was Delta Airlines. And I put applications into each one of those. And I did have a friend when I was doing the Learjet thing out in California. I was actually living with him. He was a Continental pilot. And he brought my application in to the main guy, but he turned me down. General aviation guys were just not that qualified, according to them, back in those days. So all the guys that they were getting were military. The guys that were military had been through all their training, just the way they trained. And I didn't have any of that, But so I got turned down by actually Braniff, Delta, and Continental. But I still knew that I wanted. I threw an application to American, and they almost invited me immediately to Dallas, and I had a interview there. And while I was there, they invited me back for a second interview, which was kind of unheard of. When I sat in the first interview, I mean, the first introduction to the whole thing. I mean, I had there was probably about 6 or 7 other people in there, and all these guys were captains on B-52s and military. All of them were military, And I was not. I felt like I was just completely out of my out of realm with all these other guys. I mean, I felt so inadequate. But evidently, American thought that I was good enough to have a second interview. I had a lot of flying time. I had almost 7,000 hours when I was 28 because of all this Kwajalein flying. So they were, I guess, impressed with that. And then went back for a third interview. They had 3 interviews. The first one was just what you're like, check your logbooks. The second one was psychological testing and medical testing. You had a full-on doctors and physical examination area, and they would do blood work, do the whole thing. And the third one was actually coming back and a board interview, flying the 707 simulator. Actually, the first time we went was flying the 707 SAM just to see if you could actually fly. And you passed that, and you knew nothing about it, but they did kill an outboard engine on it, number 4 engine, and they're wanting you to shoot an approach and see if you could do it. And then they offered me a job when I was 28. I was very blessed. I really didn't want to leave Houston, but it was one of those things where, I fly with a lot of guys and said, no, I'm going to stay in this area. I don't want to go anywhere else. And I said, well, you just knocked yourself out of a whole world of aviation if you're going to sit here in Midland, Texas, or, College Station, Texas, and not, what are you going to do? Fly a King Air that's just based here? I mean, you're knocking yourself out of all kinds of capabilities and opportunities. But I ended up going to Chicago. That was my first base. Ended up meeting my wife. She was actually getting hired with American Airlines, and she was a brand new flight attendant, yeah, brand new pilot. We met, and it's been 44 years later. She had 33-year career with American, and I had the same 33 years.
That's amazing. Both on the career and the marriage. Congratulations on that. And I wanted to talk a little bit with you, Russ, about your journey. I mean, you described that very well, and I think that is a common misconception that my generation and maybe some that are a little bit older than my generation have about your generation. I think a lot of people just assume that you guys had it so easy back then, and no one understands the challenges of getting to a career like you had these days. But you really put a lot into perspective with those comments and how you described your journey. And that's, I think, really valuable for some people to know that everybody's road looks a little bit different and it's not guaranteed for anybody. And you put in the work and you get to where you are.
Aviation is not easy. I mean, you have to have a deep passion inside your heart for where you want to go with this. It's fun, but once you get behind the wheel of something, it's fun to take it off and land it and that whole thing. It's just an hour at a time, and it's a job at a time, and it's a day at a time, and and what do you have to go through to? The only thing that was good for me is that and easy for me was the capability of meeting people and them knowing me and giving me a chance.
What was training like back then when you started at American Airlines? What did you start in? All the in doc and
There were 4 of us that got assigned to 707, flight engineer on 707, and then the other 6 were assigned flight engineer on a 727. And the 707, I don't know. I mean, it had so many dials and switches and things on it that the 4 of us that, and I'm involved with these same guys, the same 4 guys today, and are very close friends of mine. I mean, your total time is eat, sleep, and study, and then work together and go over different scenarios and memory items. And then you get into the classroom, and these guys were very serious about your memory items and procedure. A lot of it was memory items. You didn't have really elaborate checklists like we do nowadays, or CAS messages that would come up. All these electrified airplanes we're flying nowadays, it has a CAS message and it has a little square by it, and you click on the square and it takes you to a checklist, and you do the checklist, and maybe it fixed it, maybe it didn't, but there's nothing you can do about it after that. But you don't have to memorize the different things you got to do, and although there are still memory items. I say it seems like it was, we were in training October, all of November, and got out at the end of December. So 2 full months of training, and then you take your final check ride, and then you got to go through your orientation flights, and you do about 5 or 6 of those orientation flights, and then you go through some more flights just with you running the panel. And you would look at the guys over their shoulder and what they did and where they did it and how they did it, and then we had these professional engineers. We call them 2-stripe engineers. I had 3. Co-pilot had 3, and the captain had 4 stripes. And these 2-stripe engineers were professional engineers. They were check airman kind of people, and so they would, check you out. Yeah, and then once they said I was good to go, then I was good to go. And I mean, it was probably a 3 or 4 month process.
What was like the progression for most people from flight engineer? I mean, I understand that probably most people were hired as a flight engineer.
Well, when I got hired and I got my congratulations, they said your perfect career is going to be 10 years as a flight engineer, 10 years as a co-pilot, and 10 years as a captain. And that's pretty well what you can expect. But with my career, I ended up doing probably, I was hired in 78, and I got checked out as a co-pilot in 82, 83. and I got checked out as a captain in 1985. So it took me 7 years to get to a captain position because the aggressive growth spurt that all of a sudden American Airlines had. And that's really what's going on nowadays. I was so lucky. I mean, I had from 1985, I retired in 2011.
But I'm sure there's more we could talk about with the airline, but you mind if we jump ahead a little bit to your retirement and then your transition back into general aviation and contract work? What sparked your interest to do contract work and get involved with the Embraer product line?
I started my company, Global Aircraft, in 2008. With all the corporate things that I had in my past, I understood corporate flying, whereas a lot of the militaries do, military gentlemen do not. And I had no idea what it'd take to, fly a Learjet or go from point A to point B. They had no idea how to file a flight plan. Everything was already done for them. So I knew all this stuff just from my previous history. But my brother came to me and he says, I need to get an airplane. He owned an oil company over in Fort Worth. So that was kind of right up my alley. I introduced him to some older airplanes, some old Cessnas, and didn't really like those. Put him in a King Air, and we did some charter work with the King Air. And then we had an opportunity to do work with this company over in Fort Worth that had 40 options on a Phenom 100. And he ended up actually buying one of those airplanes. So with those airplanes, when you go take delivery of the airplanes, you get two slots, training slots on that airplane. And so I was able to take one of those training slots. I invited another friend of mine. He was actually a retired American Airlines pilot, one of the chief pilots over there. That offered him another training slot. So he and I went through this training at CAE in Dallas on this Phenom 100. At the time, I was flying captain on a 777 going to Japan and back, so I was so spoiled. I'd get in the seat and everything. Everybody's already done everything for you. You get in the seat and how's everything? Meet the flight attendants and start the engines. With this airplane, they did it through a single pilot, so they expect you to keep blue side up, run checklists. Go through this whole thing, do a single engine approach by yourself, and then on top of it, I'm sitting there learning a Garmin 1000. I had no idea how to run that. And the problem with it was the instructors didn't have much of an idea either. So, it was actually a harder check ride and a harder type rating to get in that Phenom 100 than it was in the 777, but I made it, Mike and I, and Mike Comiskey was the other guy, and we both made it. So we started flying Greg's airplane, my brother's airplane. Whenever I was available, I'd do trips on it. And then Mike, the main guy. So we got started in that, and it evolved. It was executive air share. They started doing Phenom 300s, and they asked me if I wanted to go to Brazil to help them take delivery of some airplanes. And I went down to Brazil and flying Phenom 100s and 300s back from Brazil up to the States. And that took place 2009, 2010. I started flying the Phenom 300, which is an incredibly great airplane. Been flying it until this year was last time I went to training on it. So, it was great. It's been a great way to get back into it.
All the things in your career so far have fallen into place because of the people and the connections you've made and how you've networked with people, and that's really neat to hear.
Well, and it's so true. So it was, I retired from American in 2011. Was flying the Phenoms in 2010. So it was just a natural flow to go into the contract world and get involved with Embraer doing these deliveries. I was intrigued with the delivery because it was a 1 week process of checking this airplane out and the incredible thing about it is you're flying a brand new airplane that's got less than 10 hours on it. And it was just like, it smells new, everyone loves a new car, and get in this new smell, the new everything. And these airplanes were just phenomenal. And so, yeah, I enjoy it.
So would people hire you to do this for them, or did Embraer approach you to do deliveries for their clients, or which way did the flow of you being hired work?
It would actually be both, but mostly it came from people that would that I was recommended to hire me to go do a delivery. And as the years went by, it would end up being, I don't know, 3 deliveries a year, 4 deliveries, sometimes 5 deliveries a year. Um, and the more deliveries you made, it seemed like the more your name got out there. They would always ask Embraer, "How do I do this? What do I do?" A lot of the owners with these airplanes, particularly, were set up for pilot owner kind of people, that had been flying maybe a Pilatus or a single engine turboprop airplane and never been into a jet kind of arena. And so those are mainly the kind of people that I would work for, meet them out there, and take them through the whole process. Um, Basically, you would go through the first day and it would be a really big day of actually going and test flying the airplane, making sure when you flip a switch that it actually works the way it's supposed to. So a 2-hour flight, and then the rest of the day inspecting the airplane inside and out, and then working through the week to help them develop, accounts with different companies that are associated with the airplane. That's what I did. And I mean, you got to choose an end number. You got to go through the whole process. So what do you do? How do you do that? And a lot of the guys had no idea. A lot of times, the Embraer wouldn't like me very much because you would get to the point where you had so many blemishes on an airplane on the paint job. And I said, the only way we're going to solve this is a complete new paint job. And so they would, in the paperwork, they would guarantee the guy that he's going to get a paint job after 1 year.
Very valuable to have someone like you to do those procedures or processes with, to make sure that it's happening in the correct order and things are getting caught that need to have attention. So that's interesting.
And what about pilot training and familiarization? Was that part of your entry into service agreements too that you had, where you would mentor or do some OE with people?
Yeah, and that was probably one of the more unique things that I provided, was not only the inspection of the airplane, going through the whole process of accounts and everything else, but then I get to sit with them in the cockpit and give them best practices on flying the airplane itself. So that was really the fun part, because now you're getting into, a lot of times they have sometimes they haven't even been through training yet. So I'd be sitting in the left seat and just taking them different places and teaching them before they went to training, just to give them familiarization with the airplane. But a lot of times they had already been through training. And so I'm just sitting in the right seat, giving them, letting them fly and letting them experience the new airplane. So we generally fly. I mean, insurance kind of says unwritten rule of 25 hours of flying around with the new people. Typically, I would go out on trips. I mean, they would call me up and say, "Hey, we got a trip here, there, there," and say, "Yeah, that's okay, that's great." And as a result, all these different people that I've taken air deliveries of the airplanes would be calling me up and say, "Hey, are you available on this date, that date, that date? We need a contract pilot." And I'd say, "Yeah, either yes or no." And that was a nice thing about having just the business, because I could say no, you know, but you don't say no too many times, because then they guys will never call you back. So that kept me quite busy actually doing that.
What do you hear from the people that take delivery of Embraer aircraft? What's some of the things? What are the things that they like about them, or some things that surprise them about how an Embraer flies or different?
Well, most of the people love that airplane. I mean, the Phenom 300 is a phenomenal airplane. I mean, I guess it's the Phenom, it's where the name came from. And from everybody from NetJets to Jet, all these companies, all of a sudden they were putting in orders for 100 airplanes here. I mean, I don't know how many airplanes that NetJets has, but it's over 100 and closer to 200 airplanes. And FlexJet and all these other guys, I mean, they were just so focused on the Phenom 300. And that's, the Phenom 100 was good for a lot of the guys that went from, say, a TBM turboprop to for their first jet, but it was so restricted. My brother ended up, we had so many reasons to go to a Phenom 300. by the time it was all said and done. But and so that's what he owns now is a Phenom 300. It just does such a great job. And so yeah, and then of course they invented the legacies. They came out with a Legacy 450, 500. That medium-sized jet, and then they've now have reinvented them into a Praetor 500 and a Praetor 600. Those are the jets that I actually fly more so instead of the Phenom 300. But it's a great stand-up, cabin, 10-passenger. It's got an auxiliary power unit. You can heat it and cool it, and and big cockpit. And you guys know that well because that's the way I met you.
Capable bird, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and doing some contract flying for you guys, and it was the greatest experience for me too because I was able to witness an amazing flight department, the maintenance people, the way a flight department should be managed and done. You guys put faith back into me of what a corporate pilot should be like because of your procedures and what you do and how you fly the airplanes, and you're amazing.
Oh, we appreciate that, Russ. And obviously, certainly wanted to have more experiences with you because of who you are and the way that you operate, and just really impressive all the way around. It kind of leads me into a two-part question, though. What has been your experience as a contract pilot with other operations? And then the other end of that, from a contract pilot perspective, what is something that someone can do to get into not necessarily entry into service or deliveries, but just general contract piloting? Like if someone wanted to do that full time,
you would think that going through training on an airplane, they only teach really one way, right? On the legacy. You guys have been through training, recurrent training, all this other stuff year after year. But you get all these variances of people thinking that, they're bringing other airplanes into the arena that, this is the way I used to do it on this other airplane, and it always worked great. And this is what I'm going to do on this airplane. And well, they don't teach that. It's not in the book. It's not in the not a pilot operating handbook, and it's not in the AFM. As a contract pilot, I'm a guest there. But at the same token, it's my responsibility to voice an opinion if it gets to the point where it's unsafe. And, and that's what we're all about is flying these things as safely as possible and doing what the book says, number one, but the nice thing about the airlines is you would get in there with a pilot that you've never known, you've never flown with. And, but everyone is so, into with the procedures that, when you ask for a checklist item done, it's answered the exact same way. Very, what's the word I'm looking for?
Standardized, know what to expect.
Exactly. It's so standardized but the only thing that you know for sure is how he's going to answer that checklist. Expect from him on the next thing, at 400 feet in the air, he's going to do it exactly the same way, and it doesn't matter if you fly with, you may never fly with him again, but the next guy that gets in the seat, he's going to do the exact same way, and that's so important for standardization, corporate airplanes, corporate flight departments. You guys are extremely standardized. I love that, but a lot of them are not, but you get some guys that says, I'm not going to use the auto throttles. Well, you paid a lot of money for those auto throttles, and they're to keep you out of trouble. You say, I'm not going to use auto throttles. I don't believe them, and so okay. Well, now you're going on a trip with them, and they're not going to use auto throttles. Well, now they've oversped the flaps, and now they've overdone this, and they've busted them out. Doing 270 and under 10, and doing these things that the auto throttles are what they're designed for. So that's one radical example, but the rest of them are not quite that bad. Some of the guys will, if I'm looking on 300s, they'll be sitting there taxiing the airplane out, and they're texting while they're taxiing and off the center line. Now, and I said, you're left the center line. He said, oh, you push it back over on the center line. Say, why don't you let me taxi the airplane? And you go text your stuff, and you got to be a diplomat with these things, because you are a guest there, and so, but you see that, and it's not the airlines, it's not your operation. most, I'd say 90% of the people are great. And it makes my job easy when they're standardized and when they're doing the checklist. And especially when you got new guys on the airplane, I have to know exactly the way the instructors teach at flight safety in order to answer it and answer a question that they got. But I probably got into that a little bit too much. But what's the second question again?
I think you touched on it quite a bit, but yeah, what is it like working with the different operators? But then if you had some advice for someone who's interested in doing full-time contract work, I think a lot of it you did talk about where you kind of have to be a diplomat. Sometimes you have to put on the extra pilot monitoring, heighten your awareness on that because they might be doing something that is non-standard. Like you said, I don't want to use the auto throttles. That puts an extra monitoring burden on yourself. But what are some of the other maybe like soft skills you would think of, or uh, a way to get into that type of work, and also things to watch out for or ways to do it better?
Well, you know, number one, as a contract guy, I mean, you got to pay for your own training, right? And a lot of the airline guys would come up and say, "I want to do what you're doing. I'm bored. I'm retired. And I want to fly. I love to fly." And I said, "Well, you need to go buy a type rating." And the problem that you've got is that you have no corporate skills, corporate background behind you, and you're going to have to sit in the right seat and be a co-pilot for quite a long time until the insurance says you can be a captain on the airplane. You have to have experience, and so 9 times out of 10, after those retired guys, they don't want to do that. I mean, because the corporate, you spend on my legacy back in 2015, I bought a type rating. Ended up costing me like $43,000 by the time it's all said and done.
Gee,
Yeah, it's not cheap. By the time you do credit, you're out of town. I was in St. Louis. You're at hotel and everything, and rent car and everything else. But I had my company that whether I was going to fly it or not, I needed to know about it. I needed to go to training on the 100 and the 300 and the legacy, and I let the 100 go finally. There's 3 training events. Each one of them are recurring. Is 15,000 for the 100, another 15 for the 300, and then 30,000 for the all of a sudden I'm spending $60,000 a year on recurrent training, and it's required. A lot of guys aren't willing to do that. And now you've spent that money, but now you got to go out there and make that money back. And so how do you do that? Again, people that and the reputation that you build, and the little breaks that you get in the industry, and you do a great job for one company, and they'll come back and they'll say, "Hey, this guy did a really good job. Call him." So right now I've got probably 4 or 5 different people that I trust. And the thing is, like, if you guys call me and said, "Hey, I sent, maybe 1 or 2 people to you," but those people have to be proven to me that they're worthy of, and they have a serving heart. If it's all about you and you're, no, I'm not going to clean the toilet. I'm not going to vacuum the floor. I'm not going to, be the first one out there to try to unload bags or do whatever it takes. If you're not that kind of person, then you really don't need to be in contract flying. It's a hard thing to break into because you have to have trust. The biggest deal here is trust and knowing that you're doing a good job.
Yeah. Yeah. So that dedication to service and being trustworthy and being reliable, being available, having the training. Would you say those are probably the highlights of a good contract pilot?
Absolutely. That's a good way to put it all.
And a corporate pilot, I suppose, in general. I mean, we sometimes have to do the jobs that other people don't want to do, or other pilots in different situations might not have to do.
Well, a captain has a lot of responsibility on these airplanes. I mean, he's flight planning and fuel and being the liaison with making sure the bosses are the way they need to be. And, a lot of times you don't have, you just don't have time to do everything. I mean, cleaning the airplane, and, that's the kind of, per se, that's the co-pilot's job, or especially a contract guy. That's the role that you have to step into.
I think one thing that stood out with me when we were flying contract together, you and I, Russ, was when we were in Jackson Hole and we were trying to get down into Houston area, and the proactive approach that you took that day when we had some weather delays and some issues trying to get into an airport and we had slot times or something we had to abide by. I really appreciated the fact how you just proactively feeding information into me as the pilot in command that day, so I can give that back to dispatch and also watch for the passenger to show up. And so I think those kinds of qualities as well. I mean, just being somebody who sees beyond, like, hey, I got to sit here in the right seat today, swing the gear, call out the speeds, and do the standardized things. Somebody who's very proactive in that regard, in that role, when things don't always go as we plan, is huge. And so that keeps the phone ringing, I'm sure, on your end, because you're that kind of a person.
Yeah, and Russ does all that without overstepping
Exactly.
bounds. Like he said, he's a diplomat about everything, but
Right.
he he's not trying to take command, although I'm sure that if it was necessary, he would, but
He was a vital part of that team that day, and he was an outsider looking in, but he did exactly everything I needed him to do without even asking him, and did it with a willing and servant-hearted attitude.
That's so
great.
nice. That's so nice of you to say. Thank you. Um, that's what, that's what we all try to do. We're working on safety. You can't think of everything,
Right.
when you have a lot of experience in the air. I mean, that's what I was doing. I mean, that's what I depended on with American Airlines when I'm flying, captain on these airplanes, and we've had numerous things where you're coming back from Frankfurt and MD-11 with wind shear and DFW and making a go around, not, the wind shear is still there and having to go to an alternate airport. I mean, I'm dependent on those other two. There were two guys on, typically on those airplanes. Uh, Anything over 10 hours, you'd have a third pilot, and anything over 12 hours, you'd have three pilots, three, so a crew of four. But, and every one of these guys were all captains one way or another. They'd checked out maybe an MD-80, but they wanted the capabilities of having the days off in a 777, because you get a lot more days off and flying these bigger trips and things. A typical month of going on 777 to Tokyo would be flying 9 days a month, because each trip that you did was 25 hours of flying, and most you could fly was 75 hours, so that equates to 3 trips a month. And like, there were guys living in Anchorage, Alaska. They were, and they would commute to Dallas. I mean, and you get 20 days off a month. I mean, that's what it's about. But
Yeah.
I depend on every one of those guys, and that was the nice thing about being able to look back and say, well, what do you guys think?
Yeah.
I got solid, good answers, and, but like on that Phenom 100, it was all me, and I'm sitting saying, okay, well,
What do I
nobody
think?
to question to. So, but, but yeah, I mean, you've got to do that. You've got to be proactive.
Yeah.
And think out
Yeah.
of the box.
Yeah. No, very good.
For someone that was just starting out today or is very early in their career, what advice would you have for them on ways that they can accelerate their growth and their professionalism and progress in their career? What would you say is the biggest takeaway there?
Number one, I mean, you have to have the seed planted in your heart. You've got to have the desire to, no matter what it takes, this is what I want to do in my life. Some of these guys that I flew with, even with the airlines, they were doctors, lawyers, dentists. They were military guys. They got out of the military. So, they'd go to law school. They'd go to, a full-on doctor, physician. And they came back and they said, it came to my realization that I didn't even like it. I didn't like going to work. But I've also had guys that in their 30s and 40s going to a flight school to learn how to fly because that's what they want. They just said, I don't want to do that job anymore. And I just got through flying with a guy yesterday. He was my Cirrus checkout guy. And so that's a whole realm of my next steps of what I'm going to do in my life, I think. But he was 28 years old, and we had flew from Addison Airport over to Longview. I took him out to a Mexican restaurant. We said, okay, what are you really trying to do here? what's your ambitions? What do you got? How old are you? What do you got? What do you want out of this whole thing? And he said, well, I worked for Wells Fargo. I did this. I was in the financial department. I ran, all these things, and I just didn't like it at all. Nothing wrong with Wells Fargo.
Yeah, it's not for everybody.
Yeah. And he just says, it wasn't in my heart. What's in my heart? I just started this flying, 3 years ago. I started working with the Cirrus group and cleaning the airplanes and things. And the guy that he saw how much I loved it, and he ended up letting me learn how to fly. And now I'm an flight instructor for him. It's 3 years later, he gave me a break. And now he's looking at getting a chance to fly a TBI. And so it's that kind of thing. Again, having those chances, and you've got to know that inside your heart that that's what you want to do. And, I've talked to a lot of guys at the church and doing different things about having young kids, and some of the fathers that are pushing their kids with sports and all this other stuff. And some of the kids don't want to do sports. And I say, find out what he really loves. Is it art? Is it whatever, and let them excel at that, because if they're not happy with throwing a baseball or getting hit on a football field, or that's not what they want, but they would rather go take piano lessons, there's nothing wrong with that, because they may become the best piano player in the world and making millions of dollars doing that. You've got to have that seed planted in your heart and know that that's what you want to do. And then the rest of it is fight, fight, fight. Get in there and do it.
Fight, fight, fight. Yeah.
A lot of grit and determination to continue to keep doing what you're doing and see it through.
Like a dog chasing a car in the street.
Yeah.
You'll catch it.
Yeah.
Never give up.
Right.
Fast.
Yeah. Exactly. Never catch that. It's that rotating wheel, but the thing is, you will catch it sooner or later, because something will happen.
About networking, do you have any skills that you've learned over the years for being better at networking?
I do have a website. It's globalaircraft.us. Just redid my website, but that's the realm of it all. These guys are saying, "Oh, you got to do Instagram, you got to do this, and you got to do that for the Facebook." And I'm not a really big fan of those things, but at the same token, there's a lot of ways of networking in the aviation industry. The biggest is the National Business Aircraft Association, NBAA, and you go to those places and visit all the different OEMs of the people that build different airplanes. I mean, they got booth after booth after booth. It gets to the point where you walk all day long and you haven't seen every person in there or every booth in those places that provides something for aviation. Networking, it's a great networking place. I'm looking forward with the Cirrus to go to some of the Cirrus organizational meetings and safety meetings and different things that they do. And it's basically, I'm 75 years old. So I went to my last legacy training just 2 weeks ago, and I got out of there. And so I'm good for another year of doing
Congratulations.
work. Yeah. My wife's ready for it too, but ready to do something a little bit different. But I'm going to continue with my career and work with contract work, especially for people that I want to be with, like you guys. If you call me, I'll be there. If I'm working with Jet Aviation a little bit, I'm working with, some other favorite people of mine that I love to fly with, and, 1 or 2 trips, maybe a month for the next year, and then I'm done.
Good
And
for you.
Yeah.
You deserve
Into
it.
the serious world. Yeah.
yeah, and then I'm going to be a Cirrus pilot.
Nice.
And I just got checked out in a brand new G7, which is a state yard. It's got all of the G3000 stuff in it, all the touch screens and everything. And it's just like it's a beautiful aircraft, a beautiful cockpit. And I'm going to be able to go, and we've got actually this Friday, we're going to North Carolina, pick up a new dog.
Wow.
So we're going to pile the dog and my wife and the Cirrus, and we're going to go hopscotching across, the country.
Good for you.
Do some of that leisure flying, right?
Yeah.
That'll be good.
It's just that's kind of what I'm looking forward to.
So a few weeks ago when you and I were chatting, you were talking about some of the other ways that you've been giving back. You talked a little bit about mentoring pilots. How have you been mentoring some of the younger pilots that you've been in contact with? You talked a little bit about the Cirrus guy a few minutes ago.
Yeah. Typically, every time I go with a younger guy, I'm mentoring him, just offering, I mean, I don't know how many words of wisdom I have, but just offering them suggestions and different ways of looking at their career. But I've got a couple of young guys that I'm working with. A lot of the guys that I do mentor, they're accomplished pilots. I've written, I don't know how many letters to American Airlines and different Southwest and different places recommending these people. And a lot of them have gotten hired. A lot of them, have changed their career from corporate into the airline industry. I've been flying a lot of little smaller airplanes, the Cessna 172s and stuff, and all these instructors that are there. And I've latched on to several of them. My one guy at the Cessna 172 place is here in Roanoke, Texas, and that I work with a little bit. And then another gentleman that is a Cirrus pilot. Most of the mentoring that it takes place is when I go and get called up to sit in the right seat and best practices in the airplane. But I do have some special guys that I would like to see really progress and get to where they want to be.
That's great. Anything we haven't covered that we wanted to talk about?
I mean, you have a great knack for bringing the next question.
Lead me right
Yeah.
into the paths of the things that I wanted to talk about next. It made it so easy.
It flowed really well.
You did a really great job. Both of you did just really great job with that. And it gave me a chance to just babble on, when I shouldn't have been maybe, but
No, I think that's what it's all about for us here. I did want to ask you for a funny story or the most memorable experience from something that you learned about, eye-opening. You take your pick.
okay.
Which one you want, which
Well,
category.
one of my favorite pilots that I flew with, his name was Kerry Culp, and he was 727 pilot. Every time he had to make a takeoff, he had a toothpick in his mouth. And one day we were making takeoff. He aborted the takeoff. I said, Kerry, what's wrong? He said, I forgot my stick.
No.
Oh, his toothpick is stick. I'm a flight engineer. I'm still trying to be Mr. Nice Guy back here. And the co-pilot was looking at him like he's a Martian. And he said, you forgot your stick. You mean your toothpick? He said, yeah. Just tell him we're going to taxi back around and we're going to make another. And co-pilot told DFW Tower, said, we had to check a system out and we're ready now. Back out and make a takeoff.
Missed a checklist item. We didn't get the toothpick.
Yeah. You need to write the checklist in the checklist, We had another guy that was, so ornery. All the flight attendants disliked him. And he was just just really needed to quit flying, So the flight attendants would, we were on a DC-10 going from LA, Transcon to New York. And typically you'll get, the flight attendants will bring out the tray. It's got some ice and it's got some drinks and water, just to kind of quieten the pilots down a little bit. And then in the first hour, you'll get your meal, So no drinks came up, no meal came up within the first hour. And he said, let's give him a call to ask him where our meals are. I said, okay, sir. And I gave him a call and he said, we'll get to you. Don't worry. Don't call back. So I just told him what they said, and he said, okay, I'll be back in a minute. And he got up out of his seat and went to the back. And, back in those days, they had these carts in the aisle and they'd have a full roast. They're really nice. It was full silver service. He goes back there and he comes up a few minutes later and he's got the roast in his hand.
Whole thing.
Went back and stole the roast.
Wow.
And brought them up to the cockpit. And I'm saying, oh my gosh, I'm a brand new flight engineer on probation. First year you're on probation. You don't do anything, wear your hat, shine your shoes, say yes, sir, and that's it, And he comes up with this roast, and then, flight attendant comes up, says, someone stole, and then she looked down, the roast is on the pedestal down here. And so all these 4-letter words and all this other stuff, and she slams the door. So I want that roast back of me, and I'm like, yeah, total chaos. We're still hadn't even reached, and we've at cruise altitude. So I'm saying, this is going to end up, I wish I was in the laboratory back there and not, but another thing, so there's honored people like that. Then we had this story of my first checkout in MD-11 doing this, category 3 conditions. It's, they're calling it, 00. And we're landing and I've got a check airman with me in the right seat. It's my first landing, MD-11, and we're having to do a category 3 approach and landing. So the airplane is really supposed, he's supposed to do the landing. It's stealing my first landing that I've got. At about 1,500 feet, it had 2 autopilots on it, and it goes to single land. And so the procedure is to go around and reset your altitude, your radio altimeter to 50 feet. That's your decision altitude now. It's not 00. And so we went around, set it to 50 feet. We came back around, and they were still reporting 00, and it goes to single land again. And we've already had it all set up, but we made another missed approach and came back around. And the third approach, we still had a lot of gas. But the third approach, it did a hard nose over at about 150 feet. So what happened, the check airman on his side didn't see the fact that the radio altimeter had an X on it. And so the radio altimeter, which was the whole essence of what we were doing, depends on the radio altimeter.
Yeah.
He didn't see the X. I mean, he should have said go around. I put power on it, brought the nose up to try to get the nose gear in a landing configuration, get the airplane. We hit the ground so hard that we bounced back up into the air. We lost sight of the runway, but I knew that it probably got the tail. And so we touched back down and saw the center line of the lights, and that was about it. I mean, people were screaming and doing the whole thing. On that airplane, it has a printer on it. So I started printing out all this stuff that was wrong. And radio altimeter had failed. This other stuff had failed. We almost crashed on that one. The MD-11 was one of those that would go into this roll kind of thing. It would just kind of sit there and start gyrating, and then it would hit an engine and then go over on its back. And several of those had taken place already. So,
that was all after a long crossing, a long night, right? You were going into Germany.
This was early in the morning, like 6 a.m. and you've been up all night long.
Yeah.
We take it off at, 5 in the evening out of Dallas. And crossing, that same airplane, all the fuel gauges had an X on them halfway across the North Atlantic. Knew how much fuel we had, but then we get there and all that stuff takes place, but not a good crossing.
No.
But it actually happened again going into Santiago, Chile for me. I was explaining what happened with these guys, and I said this is what it took place, and sure enough, it went to a single land again with these guys. But we had 100 foot and a quarter mile visibility, so we that took care of the 50-foot thing. We had to. But so we, again, it went into a hard nose over, bounced again there. And that's when I, called the fleet manager. I said, you need to ground all these airplanes. This is the second time this has happened. And, and they said, okay, we'll check into it. And they called me back later. They said, we want you to be the fleet manager on the MD-11. You want me? What? I mean, I don't even like that airplane. I don't know if I ever fly it again, and you're one in charge of all the fleet, the MD-11 aircraft. I said, you need to ground them all and sell them or do whatever. They ended
the
up
check airman wasn't catching it. So
yeah. And even the check airman wasn't catching it. And they ended up selling them all to FedEx.
You've done such a wonderful job, Russ, that here's more responsibility. Well, thanks a lot, Russ.
Thank you.
I think this has been great. Thanks, Russ, for taking the time to talk to us today on Flyover Frequencies. We really appreciate the time that you've taken to give us more insight into your work as a contract pilot and entry into service pilot, as well as your career at American Airlines. If you'd like to learn more about Russ or Embraer, you can visit their websites. We'll have them listed at the end of this show. And if you own an Embraer product, it sounds like you got about a year to maybe be able to fly with Russ.
Take
I'm sure he'd
advantage
love
of
to
it.
meet you. And I'm sure even after that, he'd be willing to talk with you. Speaking from experience, he's a great pilot and a lot of fun to be around. And until next time, every aviator has a story, and we're just getting started. Catch us on the next episode of Flyover Frequencies. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Gus.
That's awesome. You guys are great.